Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We're going to wait for everybody to file in here. Probably get started at around the 2-minute mark. If you have questions during this, go ahead and pop them into the Zoom Q&A function, and the slides will be recorded, or this whole talk will be recorded, and you can watch it after. It's always the awkward start when you're just waiting for everybody to come in, and you got to fill silence.
You're doing great.
Again, welcome everybody. We'll start in about a minute here. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Ashley, did you want to kick off with an announcement?
Nope, I'll go forward. There's a message
Okay.
in the chat for everyone, which is
thank you.
logistical messaging.
Awesome. Okay, sweet. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for our first monthly BloodHound release recap. This is a monthly event, so expect us to be back in December and then going forward to give you kind of a recap of what we've put into BloodHound Community Edition and BloodHound Enterprise, as well as some other parts of SpecterOps, some announcements and research and tradecraft spotlights. So who are we? So to this time, you'll have myself. I'm the Vice President of Products here at SpecterOps. Chris, you want to give your introduction?
Sure. I'm Chris. I'm product architect here. I'm working on BloodHound graph expansion.
Matt?
Hey, I'm a senior adversary simulation consultant, typically focused on various forms of penetration testing and red teaming.
And Christopher.
Hi, I'm our Director of Internal and Community Products, and so I oversee a lot of our work on things like Ghostwriter, Mythic, and our other large open source projects.
Russell, you're here too, so you got to give your introduction. Put you on the spot.
Hey y'all, my name is Russell Van Tile. I'm the Director of Service Delivery here at SpecterOps, so I oversee all the parts of the services side of the company. And
so the idea here is we're going to have representation from across research, services, and product on every month. So if you have a question, hopefully one of us here can answer your question. Otherwise, we'll follow up with the answer later in Slack. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the month in review. And because this is our first one, we're going to do a couple months in review. We're going to shout out some community contributions that we received. We'll do a research and tradecraft spotlight. This month we'll be showing off BOFHound, so Matt will give us a tour of that. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. So release review, we're going to go in order here. We're going to first focus on BloodHound enhancements. That goes to both BloodHound Community Edition and BloodHound Enterprise. There are a couple specific portions that will only go to either one of those. We'll go through SharpHound, AzureHound, and then other updates. All right, so starting first with BloodHound. Dark mode, general availability. I think I'm probably the only person that doesn't like this as much as the rest of the folks, but this has been widely lauded. A lot of people wanted this back into the product. Got this in over the summer for the Black Hat release, and a lot of people have really enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it too. 22 additional Active Directory properties, and those have also been supported with new saved queries in the Cypher Saved Queries tab. That deals with authentication, passwords, trusts. I'll have a more of a detailed breakdown on that here in a second. Remote desktop attack path enhancements for Citrix environments. We'll get into this again more in depth here in a second. But if you've ever had an RDP edge that ended at a Citrix host, you may have been frustrated that you couldn't actually use that RDP attack path. We'll show you how we're going to account for that going forward. A new attack path, a community contribution that we got. Right GP link. So this targets OUs and the ability to set a malicious GPO and take over underlying principles beneath those OUs. So that is awesome. And we also auto tag OUs that contain tier 0 objects as tier 0 now in both BloodHound Community Edition and BloodHound Enterprise. The logic here is if you can, if a OU contains a tier 0 user and you have the ability to link a malicious GPO, then we'll want to tag that OU as tier 0. A lot of pre-saved query enhancements. So there's additional queries for some owned objects. We have a new OU mapping structure coming in. That was a saved query in the legacy version of the product. That was actually supposed to be out yesterday, but we got a little bit delayed on release. That's going to go out tomorrow now. A lot of updates to the Kerberoastable user logic, and just a better look and feel and function of this save cipher queries window. So it will now take up the full page. If you've used that so far, you'll understand what I'm talking about, but I can also pull that up and show you what that looks like. A lot of enhancement to ADCS. So a lot of improved logic and accuracy, especially for large multi-domain or cert chaining. We also brought in some additional visibility where everyone or the authenticated users group was involved, and also clarified a lot of abuse information to make that easier for you if you're executing those attack paths. Data uploads and zip files, they now support this UTF bomb marking. So a lot of people were running into this on the community side, and also the enterprise side. When you go to upload, it would say it was complete, but it wasn't actually complete, and those was because of those UTF bomb markings. So we now support those in zip file uploads, so those should be working just fine now. A ton of quality of life and bug fixes. Won't go into all of them, but you should see those bugs improving over time. For BloodHound Enterprise customers, data reconciliation is the process that we take to prune old data or reconcile group memberships automatically. So in BloodHound Community Edition, when you collect data, it is additive. We don't delete old data. So if you remove somebody from a group, you wouldn't see that in Community Edition. In Enterprise, we do. So if we see that somebody is removed from a group, we'll show you that change. That reconciliation time, Enterprise customers now have the ability to manipulate that. BloodHound Enterprise customers also have the ability now to schedule analysis. This is useful for very, very large customers who might be doing collection continuously and want to schedule that analysis during off hours. For BloodHound Community Edition customers only, you now have the owned object glyph back in, and that is another community contribution. Something a lot of people really wanted back, and happy to get that back in. And there was a Docker Compose health check. This is a kind of a fairly nuanced problem that people were running into, but one of our community members gave us a contribution to check with where a Neo4j web port was modified, and basically just make it easier to deploy and upgrade. So thank you for that.
The owned object glyphs are nice for pen test reports when you're trying to illustrate an attack path as part of like a report. It's good for that. I liked it for that at least.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll show you. We'll get into a slide that will show that specifically too. So dark mode, again, I think a lot of people really appreciated this. This is what it looks like. It's now GA by default, and you can set it by going to the settings cog up on the top right. Some of the additional Active Directory properties that we collect now. So there's a lot here. You can see these by Some of them are on user objects, but a lot of them here are listed on the domain object. So if you pull up a domain that you've collected from, the domain object itself will list all of these AD properties. So quite a lot here to play with now. And we're going to be using these in future enhancements to BloodHound Enterprise, specifically attack path modeling and trust modeling. Here's those glyphs that we were talking about, so that Russell was talking about. So very useful for indicating objects owned in a penetration test. Russell, I don't know if you have anything further to add there.
Back before, what I would use that for as well is sometimes like I know that I've compromised an account, so I'm looking for a specific attack path from a specific user instead of like a general one, or I'm trying to make a map. And so it's always useful when you can do the Cypher queries to like include the owned objects kind of thing to start from there. But that's about it. It's good for reports.
Nice. So the right GP link attack path. So this is what it looks like in Enterprise, but everybody has support for this today. Again, those tier 0 OUs, the OUs that contain tier 0 users are now tagged into our definition of tier 0 on both products automatically. And then BloodHound Enterprise will automatically find this attack path and expose it on the attack paths page. And BloodHound Community Edition users can use this attack path when they're searching for attack paths in an environment. So this again is just indicating the ability to link a malicious GPO to an OU.
For us on like consulting services delivery, we've been hesitant to use that tradecraft because if you mess it up, you can really mess some stuff up in an environment. We do leverage it more in like training ranges and whatnot. It's completely a valid attack that you might find in all kinds of environments, but my advice would be careful. Maybe try your tooling beforehand in like a test environment to make sure it works if you're going to actually exploit this. There could be some consequences you weren't accounting for when it comes to that GPO you modify.
Good point. So enhanced RDP logic. So initially, if you rewind time a couple years, the way that we model attack path or the ability to connect via remote desktop was just by if the user was in the remote desktop users group in a computer. We then enhanced that with user rights assignments, which looks and ensures that people who are in that group can actually RDP. There was another edge case that we didn't cover until this year, which is with specific to Citrix. So back, say 10 years ago, when Citrix initially deployed, they asked you to put the authenticated users or the domain users group in the RDP group of the Citrix host. And that's how Citrix granted the ability for people in your domain to use the Citrix environment. There's a problem with that, because if you have the authenticated user group in the RDP group, then everybody can RDP into that host. At least that's how it was initially. They realized that was a big security problem. So then Citrix has a mitigating control that will actually tear down the RDP connection now. That's on later builds of Citrix, and you want to verify that you're on that later build. But if you attempt to RDP, you'll see the window spin up and then it will tear back down. So from BloodHound's perspective, this could look like a false positive because we verified that the user rights assignment was correct. The user was in the correct group, but we couldn't RDP to it. So again, it represented as a false positive. Citrix now uses to mitigate against having everybody in the RDP group, they created another group on the host called the Direct Access Users Group. And so only people that are local admins on the machine or in the Direct Access Users Group can actually RDP into the system. So that's how they protect against, like, they grant people access to Citrix, but they don't allow people to RDP into the host. And now we model that correctly. That is a setting that you can change within BloodHound Enterprise under the configuration window. And this will, again, model that correctly. You need to make sure that you are using the proper version of RD or Citrix that does have that mitigating control configured. Very, very complicated, very nuanced, but hopefully we'll remove some of those false positive RDP edges. Again, it's not necessarily a false positive because we were showing the right properly. There was just a mitigating control in Citrix that we weren't modeling before today.
Is it accurate to say that you need to have, like, I'm thinking from a penetration tester's perspective, you need to have permissions to be able to read that local group membership from the host first? Because I'm thinking if we're doing a test, I might not be able to grab that. I might have some low priv user that can't read that group on that host.
If you have the ability to read the RDP group, you have the ability to read the other group.
Okay.
So you wouldn't get one without the other, unless you've done
Okay.
something very, very interesting and nuanced and weird. So,
Good
but
point.
by default, you should be able to read both if you can read either.
I'm happy to see that because I always got very frustrated when I pulled up the community edition. I was like fired up. I was like, I got all these attack paths, and then they were all 25 of them were Citrix ones, and I couldn't use any of them. And then I was sad again for the rest of the day.
Correct. Yeah, and what we've also found is people, now that we have this direct access users group, we've actually found where people put the authenticated users group in both the domain, the RDP group, and the direct access users group, which then again allows anybody to RDP to it. So it's like there are opportunities for misconfiguration still, and we'll highlight those too. So if you have this checked on, if you see that you can RDP into a Citrix host, it's because they are also in the direct access users group, and it should be a valid attack path.
Got a handful of questions in the chat. If you want to hit a couple of those while we go. Do OUs containing tier 0 OUs also get marked as tier 0 OUs?
Ooh. Yes. Yes. So that would be like let's say Jane, Jane, a tier 0 user, is in an OU, and that is nested under another OU. Yes, all of those should be all pulled up into tier 0.
Next one was, is this discussion about version 6.10 or the next that's going to be posted soon?
This is except for the map OU structure in the previous window. So I can go back, but I don't want to jar everybody's view. There was only one saved query that's actually going out tomorrow, but everything that I'm showing here today is live today.
Awesome.
It should be live as in the last couple releases.
All right, and then one more. I'll let you get back to it. Not counting ADCS edges, does BHCE support all the edges that BH Legacy does today?
BloodHound Community Edition supports far more edges than BloodHound Legacy does. You should not have an edge in Legacy that does not exist in Community Edition. If you do think you have that case, let us know, because that should not be the case. Community Edition should be everything that's contained in Legacy should be contained in BloodHound Community Edition, but much more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
All right, Sharphound, the bane of Rohan Berserker's existence. So Rohan Berserker, Andy Robbins and Will Schroeder originally created BloodHound, and Rohan is a developer on the BloodHound side today. Rohan has been, unfortunately, the sole developer for Sharphound for quite some number of years until this year. This year, we took on a project with more C# developers to completely rewrite it, where previously we were kind of, in a sense, band-aiding year over year with new information that we had learned from Active Directory environments. This is the first time that we've completely rewritten the entire way that we connect to domain controllers and query LDAP. It's a whole lot. It's faster. It's way more consistent. And there's so many bugs that have been fixed. If you haven't used that newer version that was released in September, I strongly recommend you do so. It is extremely apparent in cross-forest collections and cross-domain collections. Just a much, much better experience on the Sharphound side. And that's the culmination of like around 5 months of work in Sharphound. So quite a lot there. Hopefully it's one of those things that you kind of never notice, if that makes any sense. Like it just runs and you don't forget about it. Less time triaging and more time actually working. BloodHound Enterprise had some additional security enhancements in the way that we store information for the service. So BloodHound Community Edition is run kind of ad hoc, SharpHound Community Edition is run ad hoc. SharpHound Enterprise is a service that people can install on a host within their environment. The settings file and the auth information for that has been moved to a more secure location. So just improve security there. Azure Hound. So Azure Hound had some, Azure Hound was, there's a lot of data that comes back from Azure in the original way that we wrote it. And it, we saw this a lot in the community side. We saw this a lot in the enterprise side. Just data volumes were very, very large, and it was just slow. And so we were trying to figure out what we could do about it. Olaf, our friend over at Falcon Force, recommended our first fix, which reduced the number of concurrent connections and increased the speed there. We also added several tuning settings, so you could kind of configure those specific settings and how you want to connect to an Azure environment. Just made it a little bit faster still. And then probably the biggest impact was this one, where we reduced 80% of data volume. We saw this on the enterprise side as well, and it was just a massive reduction, greatly increased the speed. That was another community contribution. Awesome contribution there. On BloodHound Enterprise only, we also reduced that default batch size that we collect from. So the overall impact of this is you should no longer be dealing with like massive gigs of Azure data, and it should go much faster for you today. In other updates, we have released Python and Golang software development kits. So if you want to build your own integrations, you don't need to. You can certainly use the REST APIs directly by going through the settings cog and looking at the API information. You can also use our pre-built software development kits. So whether you're a Python or Golang person, go ahead and try those out. Give us some feedback, questions. We'll also give some like enablement sessions early next year for those. ServiceHound integration, we got a cool community contribution here. This is pulling BloodHound data into ServiceNow. So if you want to create tickets and hand those off to your IT teams to work on, this community contribution can help you do that. I will say that we're also working on a built-in integration with ServiceNow, and you should expect to see that early next year. All right, so a ton of community contributions for this period. And so we want to say thank you to Andreas Anderson, who gave us the owned object glyphs. Ellie Ajaka, who gave us ServiceHound, that ServiceNow integration, and that's linked on, these are all linked in our support documentation. Matej Zedek reduced the Azure Hound data by 80%. Olaf Hartong reduced Azure Hound connections. Quinton Roland authored that right GP link attack path for control over tier 0 OUs, or any OU for that matter. Giannis Hoffman did that Docker compose health check, and it might seem small. It probably saved a lot of people some headache. I skipped past it a little bit, but I want to show you what those folks receive. So when you put in a contribution and we pull that into the product, we send a thank you gift. And one part of that thank you gift is a BloodHound coin. And so this is given to only contributors to the BloodHound project. Something that we're pretty proud of, and hopefully you guys are too. All right. I'm going to pass it over to Matt, who's going to give us a tour of BOFHound. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, Yeah, so this is going to be a technique that we frequently leverage on red teams. On that slide that Justin just had up a moment ago, there's kind of a screenshot from the game Civilization, if you're familiar with that. Kind of seen a good analogy from one of our coworkers between this technique, this iterative process of using manual LDAP queries, slowly building out your directory data, as kind of compared to kind of pushing out the fog of war in, one of these games that leverages a similar concept. So as opposed to just kind of like revealing the entire map and the entire directory all at once with something like SharpHound, which might be seen by the blue team or one of the other warring factions in a game like this, taking a little bit more of a strategic approach, just enumerating what we're interested in, and slowly building out that map. Kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we go through a quick demo here. Thank you, Justin. Share my screen. So a little bit more background, kind of what this tool BOFHound was built to solve, and kind of the niche in which it fits. So we on red teams where we have a stealth component, we kind of run into a predicament where obviously we're worried about detection. So we don't want to run tools like SharpHound or other automated forms of collection that might be quote unquote noisy, something like AD Explorer from sysinternals. But we really still want to maintain that ability to interact with the BloodHound user interface to map out relationships, ACL-based attack paths, and really just keep track of our Active Directory data without relying on, text-based files, worksheets, or other manual notes. Some of those detections that I've seen in my experience usually rely on one of two methods on the server side. Those two are matching static LDAP query filters and volume of LDAP data queried. So in other words, if you're running an LDAP query with a filter that is known to be hard-coded into a common offensive tool like Rubius, SharpHound, or Impacket, or if you just in general, you're returning an abnormal amount of data. So tools like SharpHound will try to return most directory data in just a few LDAP queries. Some tools will try and return almost all of it in just one, but those can provide key detection points for the blue team. So on these assessments where we're trying to limit those detection points, I've frequently turned to a BOF from the Trusted Sec situational awareness collection called LDAP search. And this helps alleviate some of those potential detection points. We're in complete control over the LDAP query filter, so we can intentionally avoid using query filters that are known to be in some of those offensive tools that I mentioned. And we also have the ability to kind of limit the scope of our queries or limit the number of results returned and help control that volume of data that we're querying. So what you're seeing on the screen here, this is a console of Havoc. Havoc is an open source command and control framework. Shares a lot of capabilities with something like Cobalt Strike, a commercial command and control framework that we might leverage on one of these actual red teams with a stealth component. This command here is just a very basic LDAP search query. So we're leveraging that LDAP search BOF, and we're just simply querying for one object from the directory, this user named Cersei Lannister, based on their same account name attribute. And we're looking to return all of that object's attributes, including the NT security descriptors. That's what those args are. And this is just the game of Active Directory lab I've got running locally on a box. So we'll go ahead and execute this query. You can see we get a bunch of data come back. This is essentially representative of one node in the BloodHound graph. So this would be a user node. We've got all of this user's attributes here. And this big base 64 NT security descriptor includes all of the data, basically the binary ACL that we would parse out to find out, who has object takeover avenues, generic all, who owns this object, things like that. So I'll go ahead and we'll query one more object. Go ahead and query the domain admins group in this domain. These are very basic queries, so I'm just simply querying for one object at a time here. Obviously, this is very slow in environments where you potentially have hundreds of thousands of objects. But again, you have complete control over that query filter, so we can do things like unrolling an entire group member, an entire group's members at one time, or unrolling a user's entire nested group membership. And we can return thousands or hundreds of results instead of just simply one. So this is kind of how we control that detection surface piece when we're doing these LDAP queries on some of our offensive engagements. But how do we actually convert that into BloodHound compatible data? So that is going to be where BOFHound comes into play. BOFHound is actually not a BOF. So the BOF is a beacon object file. It's a way of executing inline tradecraft in one of these command and control frameworks like Havoc or Cobalt Strike. BOFHound is really just a Python script. It runs completely offline from your target environment. And we're simply just reading the log data from Havoc. So all this text data here just gets spit out to a text file on disk, essentially. And we're just reading that to parse out these objects that we've queried, parse that into security descriptor, and then try and make some of those same relationships that BloodHound makes and spit out that BloodHound compatible JSON that we can upload to the UI. So when we run this, it runs offline. We can see that we found 3 log files, and I pre-populated those log files with a little bit more data than just the 2 objects that we queried here. So you can see we found 172 objects, got a fair amount of groups, and I also parsed out some ADCS objects here, including certificate templates. At the end of that, we are given a zip file, and we can take that zip file and upload it to the BloodHound Community Edition UI. Again, I've already preloaded this in here just for the sake of time. What you'll notice is that we kind of have an incomplete data set. So this is kind of that fog of war that we were talking about at the beginning of the section. If we look, I only have queried objects that I'm specifically interested in, or maybe around OUs that I'm specifically interested in, but I have not queried all objects in the directory. So we end up with this somewhat incomplete data, but it allows us to kind of provide a roadmap to work back from certain objects. So query here that I have up on the screen is looking for enrollment rights on published ESC1 certificate templates. And some of those certificate templates that I queried match that criteria. And by parsing the ACLs on this object, we can see that there are a couple of principals that have either enrollment rights or generic all over this template that I have not queried. And so we know now at this point we have a SID. We can kind of walk back to our console, make more queries, reparse the data, upload it back to BloodHound, and kind of begin to fill in this graph. And it also works with groups and users. So as well as taking a look at the ACLs that are on any object, looking at that inbound object control, we can also take a look at the member and member of attributes for these groups and users. So while we don't have all of the the members for this domain admins group already queried and parsed out, we can see that there are members of this group that exist. We've got a Robert Baratheon, a Cersei Lannister. And we have the distinguished names for these groups and users, again, providing us another attribute that we can base further queries on. Yeah, and so that's really all I've got, Justin.
Nice. Yeah, this is awesome for folks that are looking to be a little bit more stealthy in their testing engagements. Again, like Sharkbound's pretty well known at this point. So if you try to run that, if you're doing some type of at least not seeded, test, something like BOFHound could really help in that engagement. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, and if this piqued anyone's interest, either from a offensive perspective, as an operator using BOFHound and LDAP search, or from a defensive perspective, some of the LDAP reconnaissance detection techniques that I referenced earlier, happy to answer any questions here or in the BloodHound Gang Slack afterwards.
Awesome. All right. Some quick announcements before we get into Q&A. So what is Tier 0 webinar? Our 4th iteration of that is going to be happening tomorrow. That's with Jonas, Martin, and Lee from our team. Very interesting conversation, especially around Active Directory certificate services. So do join that. We've seen some gaps in understanding what Tier 0 is, and we wanted to have the kind of open dialogue and debate on are certain principles Tier 0 or not, to help you guys better secure your environments. SoCon 2025, we're going to be back next year. The information for that can be found on our website, but the call for papers for that ends this Friday. So if you're interested in presenting, please get that in on Friday. Our next attack path management webinar with BloodHound Enterprise is on Tuesday, November 19th. And that's with Pete McKernan from our team. And then our next version of this in December is going to be on December 12th. I will preview that that's going to be a pretty large release. We have quite a lot to get through in that one. So I would say stay tuned for the announcement there. We should have that link up in the next week or two. All right, questions. I saw a couple more get asked. One of them I'm going to just demonstrate in the product and hopefully answer this question. But somebody asked for the GP link. It would be nice when you explore the object, it would show you what tier 0 is in that OU as well, so you don't have to manually hunt it down. I'm going to take a stab at answering that from what I think I understand of your question. And if I don't get it right, then just pop another question back in. But let me show you. In BloodHound Community Edition or Enterprise, you can search for an OU, or if you have an attack path, like the right GP link attack path to this OU. If you select the OU, you can see the members of that OU and quickly identify those that are tier 0 by that diamond glyph. So hopefully that is what you're asking, or hopefully I'm answering your question there. But let me know if that is not the case. Another question is, what is the status of importing custom queries in BloodHound Community Edition? Is it now as easy as it is in BloodHound Legacy? We have a known enhancement that we want to put in early next year for replicating that mass upload of custom queries. There are other tools that you can use to replicate that now. One of those that people use today is BloodHound Operator, and we can give you the link for that. So people use that today to do that same kind of mass incorporation of custom queries that people are used to. Christopher, do we have other questions?
I don't see any, but if I think, we have a bit of time here. So if anyone has any that you haven't covered already, they're, welcome to drop them in the Q&A, or I'll just double check. Maybe we have some in the chat. Nope. But yeah, we do have a couple that we pre-collected that we can.
There was one that was like in chat, and then I kind of answered a little bit, but I don't have the complete answer. So Justin might have a better answer.
Sure. Sure.
Someone was asking about the RDP stuff that's in the way that SharpHound does collection, and they were talking about how they have done collections from both a domain joined machine as a valid user and then a non-domain joined machine using run as. And they said that the only time they see the RDP pass from the SharpHound collection is when they're using the domain joined machine. And so their ask was, are RDP pass only seen when launching SharpHound from a domain joined machine, or is it something else going on there? And they believe they also see that with 80 CS pass. The part I added to it was, like, I know in the past, like, run as can get really finicky from a non-domain joined machine because of the way authentication works out between some hosts, and then sometimes environment variables are missing that SharpHound was looking for that made it like unable to know where things were at. I don't know if that specifically affects those groups, but it can be tricky with that from my experience.
Yeah, that was from Robert. I'm reading the question now. Unfortunately I don't have more information there. We can absolutely follow up with you. Hopefully, if you registered for this webinar and put your email address, maybe we can follow up with you directly on that. Because I know that we have the answer to your question for sure. If not, we'll try to follow up. Like if you're in the BloodHound community Slack, hit us up directly there, or pop that question in the BloodHound community, and we will definitely answer it there. I just want to make sure we follow up with you because I don't know that answer off the top of my head, but I know that we have an answer for you. So if you're in the BloodHound community Slack, ask us there. If you're not, but registered with your email, we'll throw you the answer there. And if neither of those are true, I hope we can get you the answer somehow. We'll just send you smoke signals.
If I can.
Go ahead, please, Matt.
If I can add a little bit onto what Russell was saying, having done a lot of pen tests running SharpHound from a non-domain joined machine myself in the not too distant past, a lot of times you'll end up with like that DC only collection. Basically, you can't resolve the DNS names of other machines that it needs to reach out to. So oftentimes I'd have to do something like go into my network adapter settings and set one of the domain's domain controllers as a DNS server. That'll solve some of those name resolution problems that should allow you to make those connections out to remote hosts, for that local group collection, provided that you have local admin rights.
Oh, Robert said he did register with his email address. So good. We'll get you the answer. And he did set the DNS. So hopefully we'll take that question and we'll follow up with you offline. So other questions from the community. So we've collected some questions from the BloodHound community that people have like run into, and we wanted to surface some of the ones that we think are really useful or help people avoid problems in the future. So Christopher, do you have those handy?
I do. So the first one is, Justin, are you guys moving away from Neo4j? Will we still be able to use Cypher?
So the answer is yes and yes. So we are in the process of transitioning to Postgres. We should have more information on that next one of these. So in December, we'll have more information to follow there. And then certainly more early next year. But we are in the process of that now. You will be able to use Cypher, regardless if you have Neo4j or Postgres under the hood. It will not matter. We will support Cypher for forever. Like it's very useful for interacting with graph data. We're just moving away from the database itself. We will support Neo4j based deployments for another year after we officially transition to Postgres. We'll still support your ability to run off Neo4j if you prefer that for some reason. We find a lot of enhancements in Postgres, and we'll share again more about that when we officially announce the support for that. But just want to put people's minds at ease. You can absolutely still use Cypher and use all of the save queries and all of that, regardless of the database that's running underneath.
All right.
Next.
The next one we have is, I'm having a hard time running BloodHound Community Edition. Help.
Yeah. So we see like kind of random questions like this, and most of them deal with resourcing for the community edition. So we want to make sure people know the minimum requirements is 4 gigs of RAM, 4 processor cores, and 10 gigs of disk space. If you have that, you should relieve a lot of those kind of low-hanging fruit problems. If you're running into any issues, that's the first thing that we would check. The next one is for large environments. If you are collecting in an environment with, let's say, over 50,000 Active Directory users, you'd want 96 gigs of RAM, 12 cores, and 50 gigs of disk space. So just depending on the size of the data or the size of the environment you're collecting from, make sure you have enough resources allocated to BloodHound Community Edition.
Actually, I'll take some liberty to add to that a little bit too. Is one thing we've seen with like Mythic and Ghostwriter, our other, we have those are Dockerized as well. Is that sometimes people get hung up on the build, just even after like the hand gets started, and that can be resources as well. Because even if otherwise the system might seem pretty good for most purposes or meet even the base requirements for running it, Docker will try to use all the resources at once to try to build the containers. And sometimes that can just lead to packages don't install right because system resources were constrained. So you end up with a failed build. Something doesn't work right when it's done. So sometimes even just making sure that you have the resources to be running Docker is pretty important as well. All right. Finally, the last one we had from the community is, the data directory was initialized by PostgreSQL version 13, which is not compatible with this version. What do I do?
Yeah, we have some documented migration steps. Let me put these in the chat just in case somebody here or somebody later watching this can see this. There's some upgraded chats, there's some upgrade information for how you would upgrade from Postgres 13 to Postgres 16, which is causing that error. Alternatively, you can start fresh with a new deployment. We've actually seen like half of people just start fresh, just easier for them versus like migrate. And that's the command to do that. All right. You have any more questions? No, I don't think we do.
No, I'm not seeing any.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining our first release recap. Again, we're going to have these every month. Some months they might be somewhat short. Some months they might be quite long. I'm expecting the December one to be a little bit longer, so prepare yourself for that. But thank you again for joining us. Join us in the BloodHound community Slack as always. Ask us questions, and thank you again.